Hello and welcome. My name is Barkha Dutt. You're watching the Mojo story, and the big political story today, of course, is the cabinet reshuffle, which has seen big and dramatic changes. Paying the price for the mismanagement of the lethal second wave, let's first bring up the huge change. The health ministers have been sacked. Let's bring you those key points. Union Health Minister Harsh Vardhan, widely criticized for how his ministry was steering the management of the COVID and the response to it, particularly during this past second wave, has been asked to go. He resigned ahead of the swearing in of the new ministers. His deputy was also removed. So India will have a new health minister as well as a new education minister. Those are the two big standout headlines. Is it an admission of incompetence and also accepting mistakes by the government? That's the Prime Minister speaking to new ministers earlier today. But that's not where the dramatic changes ended. The IT Minister, as well as the Information and Broadcasting Minister, Ravi Shankar Prasad and Javedkar, was also asked to resign ahead of that cabinet reshuffle. Put together, this is the big headline of the day. India's health, education, information technology, and information and broadcasting ministers have effectively been removed. If we trace these portfolios back to, of course, the fault lines that India has been going through in the past few months, then the links seem logical. What's been happening with the pandemic, of course, is obvious, but there's also been a series of poor global media headlines for the Modi government. The narrative, in some ways, hasn't been great for the government, and there you could link it back to the INB ministry. And then, of course, there have been the contentious new digital guidelines, digital content guidelines, again widely criticized, as well as spats with platforms like Twitter. What's the big political message on this big political day? Let's introduce our panel of experts today who can take us behind the scenes, or at least apply their considerably larger wisdom to try and make sense of this. Sandip Ghose, commentator and columnist, is with us. Sanjay Jha, commentator, and likes to call himself a sacked Congress spokesperson, though I see today we're designating him as the founder of cricketnext.com, and I have no idea why, unless he's going to apply some cricket analogies to the political games that are going on in the capital. Yashwant Deshmukh, one of our foremost apologists and policy analysts, is with us as well. Dilip Cherian, who knows everything there is to know about image and brand building, is going to take us behind the scenes on what the image of the government is after this reshuffle. And we're also joined by Sumanth Raman, a well-known commentator. Now, remember, there have also been some new entrants. In fact, before we start this conversation, let's bring you some pictures of some of those key new entrants. The Prime Minister did meet with them earlier today. Of course, Jyotiraditya Scindia, someone who migrated from Sanjay Jha's party, or should I say erstwhile party, was among them. We also have Rajiv Chandrasekhar making his debut as a minister in a cabinet that seems to be stressing both youth and gender. Meenakshi Lekhi is among the women to find a place in the cabinet today, and that takes the tally of women members to a very, very high level, and at 11 at last count. So we're going to be looking at these big changes, and I'll start with you, Yashwant, if I may. Health, IT, INB, education gone, right? We don't, there's a clear message there. I think that's the story of the cabinet, not so much the new entrants, but these big exits.
Many messages actually, Barkha. Number one, there is certainly a generational change aimed at looking at the core support base of Mr. Modi and the BJP right now. His core support base is certainly now for youngsters, youth, and the women voters across India. So obviously there is a generational change and a fresh new blood that is getting in charge and being given responsibilities across the board. The second message is for the good and competent leaders from the opposition side that you join us and you will be duly rewarded. It started with obviously the case of Assam, where the new chief minister came in. Himanta Biswa Sarma was given that much desired portfolio of the chief minister of Assam, and then followed up with West Bengal, where a new leader of opposition was given, going beyond what the old party timers were there in West Bengal. and now with the case of Jyotiraditya Scindia, the message is being given to all the Sachin pilots in the world that, okay, if you join, you will be duly rewarded. And the third biggest message is for the incompetency, that if the supporters or the core support base of the BJP is thinking you are not really doing your job properly. For example, somebody like Prakash Javadekar, who was severely criticized by the core support base just for saying that he did not allow the curriculum to be changed as a HRD minister, or for example, Ravi Shankar Prasad, who was seen as soft against the IT brands, who are not really following the what the core support base wanted. I genuinely believe, Barkha, that Dr. Harshvardhan is the more of a collateral damage in the wave two, because and that's a different argument, because I don't know how and when he is to be solely blamed for what happened in wave two. It was a collective.
But what do you mean by collateral damage? What do you mean by collateral damage? Do you think he's been made the fall guy? Do you think he's been made the fall guy?
It's more of a political messaging that, okay, we did away with the health ministry, we are going to get a new face, but at the same time, very carefully, not just he was taken, there are half a dozen or other senior ministers as well, so that it looks like a more of a generational change. It cannot be blamed that, okay, only Dr. Harshvardhan was taken away. So the message was blunted in that way, rightfully so, that it should not be like, I just read, somebody told me about tweet of Mr. P. Chidambaram that, taking Dr. Harshvardhan away is kind of admitting the guilt, which I am not. I mean, in that political messaging, that guilt factor is certainly not there, because then there are six others.
You don't think that it's an admission of the mismanagement with the exit of Harshvardhan, Yashwant? You don't think that there's some message there? You could argue go ahead.
I think the message is that we are taking away a big number of people who are not probably working the way I would have liked them to work, and that might or might not include Dr. Harshvardhan in that list. But I don't think that message is of accepting the guilt anywhere. No, I don't see it that way. I don't. I mean, opposition obviously would like to see it that way, and they will rightfully make all the noises. But the way the entire lock, stock, and barrel change that is sweeping across right now through the cabinet, that will be taking it as that, okay, itne log badle, saath mein Harshvardhan bhi badal diya.
Okay, let me bring in Sandeep on that. Is that how you see it, that Harshvardhan was collateral damage, or do you think the fallout of the pandemic, in a way, let me take that to Sandeep, is being contained around the health ministry? Can we unmute Sandeep, please?
See, Barkha, I would not like to just focus only on Harshvardhan. I see this cabinet reshuffle in two parts. There is a political part, very clearly, and we'll come to that later, and there is a performance part. And the performance part is both a positive and negative messaging. First of all, that Mr. Modi is not going to tolerate underperformance, and he cannot afford to do that. So that is, performance is non-negotiable. That is a message through all these people, which has gone on. Where Mr. Harshvardhan, I think, I would fault him, is not because of what is the overall COVID issue of not anticipating it or declaring victory too early, etc. But it's essentially his inability to manage the crisis. He certainly seemed out of depth at that point in time. And therefore, Mr. Modi, what will be combined, I feel, is the new appointment we will see in her health ministry. I think that will be a very strong signaling that he is bringing in a different kind of competence, which is required going forward in managing this whole COVID crisis, which is not coming to an end in a month or two. So yeah. I think that will be very critical, and that will be the messaging. And Mr. Harshvardhan's thing, Dr. Harshvardhan's thing can be also, papered over by giving him a meaningful role in Delhi. That Delhi is also going to get come into elections, because clearly, the signal was clear. Meenakshi Lekhi getting appointed, you wouldn't have expected two senior ministers from Delhi itself. So that would have, so they'll probably give him something over there. But
Yeah.
taken together, all the, both the appointments which you're seeing, the new faces, the younger faces, there's a lot of, I'll just take half a minute. I think it's very significant that there was this emphasis on the qualification of the new ministers. There's so many CAs, so many engineers, so many doctors. So there is a conscious messaging of the acquisition they've had. Modi government had a talent deficit,
And like Yashwant, you don't see this as a heads rolling message. Look at the
it's
four
not a head
ministers who've
rolling
gone.
message. There will be, it's a more of a underperformance message. If you have underperformed for whatever reason, we need to, and if the job requires, other horses for courses, if today you need a different profile, a different level of competency, we are replacing that. So it is going to be in that manner. And as Yashwant said, everybody is going to have their spin. Media will have it, opposition will have it. But I think that will get, really evened out in the next two steps, which you will see. I don't think after 2 or 3 days, people will really hold it against Mr. Modi, saying that, like somebody said, if somebody almost hinting, Mr. Modi should have resigned rather than Harshvardhan.
But let me just put that to Yashwant briefly, and then I'll open it up. Yashwant, you said that in Harshvardhan's exit, you do not actually see a heads rolling message because the pandemic handling is, of course, collective messaging. But then what about the others who've been removed? Ravi Shankar Prasad, who is, ever since I've been a journalist, has been famous for demanding the resignations of others. Today will find himself the subject of many a meme because, he's been effectively asked to go. Now, how do we not link this back to two very high profile disputes? One is the digital content guidelines, and the second is this high profile fight with Twitter. Or do you think the reason for his exit and that of Javedkar lies somewhere else? Yashwant?
Well, they are being seen too soft, it's like Kadi Ninda and that kind of branding that was going wrong in social media for long. And Barkha, these ministers have been ridiculed across social media by the BJP supporters like anything. All the names that you are watching on your screen right now, they have been literally ridiculed by the BJP supporters, particularly the youngsters, the young support base of Mr. Modi. So I guess that that sweeping change is also because of taking into account what the support base is asking for, what the supporters are looking for, and it is a message to them that your voice is being heard. It is not that the changes are not being done, or we are a government who doesn't really listen to what the supporters want from us. So I think there is a very clear message. I am not on Twitter right now. I have taken a sabbatical from Twitter for a few months. But I can tell you, if you go out on Twitter right now, big number of celebratory messages would have been there for all the names that are being out from the ministry right now.
Okay, so one of the things, let me take this question now to Madhavan. And Madhavan, my question to you would be this. I saw your tweet which said that the Modi government listens to bhaks but also pays seeking attention to the critics of Latyan's India. You seem to have a very different reading of this than Sandeep and Yashwant, who see no heads rolling message in these changes at all, who in fact think that the emphasis is on bringing in more technocrats, more professionals, more young people, more women, and getting rid of deadwood, and that these men, and they are all men who've gone, that these men would be seen as deadwood by BJP's own supporters is the point I think that both Yashwant and Sandeep are making. So where did Latyan's liberals come into it, Madhavan?
My language may be a little tad different from what Yashwant says, but in essence, what is clear is that what is in focus is performance, and in performance, you look at the details. So what is Modi's real message in this is that loyalty is not as big as you think it is. What matters is competence to deliver, especially as the government enters the slog overs of what is already a second term. So there is only so much pro-incumbency you can expect. So what it means is also that a lot of the critics who've been criticizing the government on performance, especially the Lutyens media, they are focusing on what the ministers ought to do. They are actually indirectly helping the government. So if you take the criticism as advice in slightly harsh terms, you're on a positive wicket. Whereas loyalty for self-interest, which is what a lot of bucks do, or out of simple blind love, it doesn't get the government performance-oriented brownie points which it needs, because it has already implemented some of the agenda that it is used to come to power. Article 370 has been abolished in Kashmir. Ram Mandir is being built. So they know that the Hindutva cards have been played out, and after the coronavirus pandemic,
So
it's
these are
very clear.
dispensable. These are dispensable ministers, according to you.
Sort of, especially because I have my own slight conspiracy theory that some of the ministers may have been eased out because of intelligence reports, which keep coming back. Because if you know the style of functioning of this government, it is based on what the Guptachar Vibhag, they are still reliving the Maratha Empire in some ways. So that apart, the fact is that they feel the ministers who really work are the ones who are not only speaking loud, but also not causing any embarrassment to the government and seem to be delivering, apart from the factors that we have already mentioned.
But let's take another portfolio, and I think Sandeep pointed this out. The Ravi Shankar Prasad has also been holding the portfolio of law, and we have stressed on linking this resignation back to the digital sort of content guidelines controversy. But there's also law, and there's Javedkar. Javedkar is seen to be quite a loyal sort of foot soldier of the government. Anyone wants to Dilip, if as a branding exercise, what is the branding message of this cabinet? If I can get you in now, Dilip.
Sure. I think that the branding exercise has been at three levels. One is that the whole age game has been played. That we moved from an average age of 61 to an average age of 58.
Okay, we lost Dilip right there on cue. So let me take the same question to Sumanth. Sumanth, do you want to take that? I think Dilip was making the point about age.
Yeah.
Sumanth, yeah.
Barkha, I would, yeah, my take on this is quite different. If Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad and Mr. Prakash Javadekar were thought to be poor performers, and of course there were many who did think so, then they could have been shunted out to some other, less high-profile ministry. So the point that the fact that they've been dropped clearly is for a reason, right? So that is point number one. Second, I don't agree with Yashwant when he says, this thing is also about performance and all that, because if it was, then the first one to have been in the firing line should have been Nirmala Sitaram. And as of now, we don't see any change as far as her ministry is concerned. So what this message seems to be to some extent is also a kind of easing out of some of the senior older guard, as it were, in terms of Sadanand Gowda, Harshvardhan, Prakash Javadekar, and Ravi Shankar Prasad, and so on, and replacing them with a mix of people who are young, some of them with credentials in terms of qualifications, some of them who have jumped parties and have been given promises in the past which have to be redeemed, and at the same time, some of them who have performed well and therefore need to be promoted. So I think it's a combination of all these things. I don't see any single message out there, but I'm extremely surprised that at the axing of Ravi Shankar Prasad and Prakash Javadekar, obviously the talk now is Ravi Shankar Prasad will go back to his being general secretary of the party and swap places with Bhupender Yadav. But I mean, that remains to be seen. But the fact that the resignations were announced hardly an hour before the ceremony was to begin, I think that tells a tale. Until 3:34, almost in 5 o'clock, you did not know that Ravi Shankar Prasad and Prakash Javadekar were going. You only knew about the others. So I think that there is some smoke below the surface. We will probably come to know in the coming few days.
So it's not an obvious answer. You don't agree with Yashwant that these are, they were subjects of discontent even among the BJP base. Let me just bring in Sanjay now. Sanjay, go ahead. You're reading.
Barkha,
sorry, let me just unmute you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Mr. Modi is an outstanding politician. He's very astute, and more than any politician across the entire spectrum, he understands the importance of perceptions. Now, My take is that when his legacy comes to an end, whether it comes in 24 or even later, he is fully aware that the second coronavirus wave that happened between mid-March to May will continue to haunt him. It will become like a lasting legacy. This is not something that the people of India can ever forget, no matter what happens with the vaccination. Those summer months, Barkha, are a chronic nightmare for many people. Not just for those who died and their families. You lost your own dad. And I can tell you this for a fact that, the sound of the ambulance, I meet people who tell me that the sound of the ambulance that used to start in the morning and ended in the evening continues to haunt us even today. So I think somewhere down the line, Mr. Modi had to create a distance here between his persona. Because remember, whether no matter how much of a headline management the BJP does, the truth of life is that the buck does stop at the top. And I'm borrowing another of your lines from your NDTV program. That is the truism. You can't ignore it no matter what political spin you try. And I think
Yeah.
what the Modi has done here is by actually, I agree with Yashwant, he's collateral damage, but that's what politics is about, right? If any
Yeah.
one of us here was the prime minister, we were not going to resign. Let's be practical about that. And
Yeah.
therefore, you do need to tell someone to, hey, walk out of the door. Now, what happens at the moment if you were to go across any part of the country? Nobody knows almost 40 of the 43 people who are getting in, other than Jyotir Aditya and a few other people. But you do know who's going out.
I,
And they,
I I kind of agree with that. I think the story of the exits, and I want to take that to Yashwant in just a second. But I think the story of the exits is the bigger story than the story of the entrance, because the entrance, other than okay, you can emphasize that there are more women, you can emphasize that Sindhya and Bhupinder Yadav and Rajiv Chandrasekhar are in, but the main story seems to be on the exits. And at a time when there's such disquiet, the exits may make it look like the government has acted. Sanjay, go ahead.
is, in my opinion, the most German issue of this cabinet reshuffle. Mr. Modi is sending out a message to the people of India. Remember, for a lot of us, we can call ourselves analysts and political academic, and we comment on who's getting what ministry. Think of the people of this country. I have followed the prime minister very carefully ever since he became, the Gujarat chief minister. And I have always felt, you got to learn from your opponent. Mr. Modi's cabinet reshuffle is actually not about the number of people coming in. The larger message is, listen, if the pandemic has been a mammoth disaster, I'm actually fixing the guy who's done it. And therefore, by creating this distance, it really does give him an opportunity tomorrow to say, listen, I took action. I, I,
I
act- I actually
I actually tend to agree with you, and I want to say that to both Yashwant and Sandeep, both of whom think that the emphasis is not on the exits but is on the entrance. Now, Yashwant, you were arguing it logically that of course the pandemic handling was a collective decision. Of course it was, but the prime minister, rather collective responsibility. But it's smart politics, isn't it? To find a fall guy whom nobody is going to feel sorry for. Nobody is going to say, "Oh, poor Harshvardhan." Nobody is going to say that today, right? Yashwant?
Well, obviously, I mean that's the good optics of it. That's the smart politics out of it, Barkha. I mean that's why I said that on one hand, the health minister and his deputy both have been moved away, and at the same time, while doing a sweeping changes, it has also been blunted, kind of taken away that sentiment that okay, we are guilty of something. Are you getting my point? So if there was change that okay, among the seniors only Dr. Harshvardhan would have been dropped, then the message would have been that okay, there is a sense of guilt that there is the fall guy and this, so both the messages have been played out very, very smartly, I would say, as far as the real politic is concerned, Baka. And also the fact that we need to look into that how these people are now being accommodated, because there are various things which at the party line
That they
also
could be, that they
there
could be.
could be. You see,
Yeah.
Delhi, Barkha, for sure in Delhi, BJP is like headless chicken for almost like 6-7 years now, and we know for sure that no matter how harshly we judge the tenure of Dr. Harshvardhan, within Delhi and the BJP Karyakartas, he enjoys a very good image and over there. Same thing has happened in the BJP organization where, as and when they come into power, their list of party spokesperson becomes absolutely unmanageable or unbearable, if I may say so. their best of the faces go into the government and their worst of the faces come into the list of the BJP spokespersons. Now, with the faces being eased out, maybe they would be utilized to handle the media in a much better way. And BJP's media handling has been off late, not the same
Is
that they were known.
Yeah. Is that linked to Mr. Javadkar's exit, Sandeep, in your point of view, the narrative which is so important to this government? Prakash Javadkar, by the way, is on record saying he doesn't think the INB ministry needs to exist in a modern democracy, and on that I sort of actually agree with him. But Mr. Javadkar is not a controversial minister known for shooting his mouth off, right? So his exit maybe could mean something else, and I think there Sumanth has a point, that we can't see every exit into the framework of incompetence or some controversy. Or can we?
No, yeah, so I said not incompetence. It's a question of underperformance. I don't know what's the feeling of other panelists here. I think Javadkar's handling of the communication ministry was also, he was seen to be, deficient in that. I don't think it is the best handling of communication per se, and the INB. And Ravi Shankar Prasad, the point I was making to you, we are all fixated on this IT fracas which is happening. And the other point is, I think BJP's Achilles' heels has been also in the handling of the law portfolio ever since Arun Jaitley passed away. So they will have to beef up some of these things, and these are all part of Mr. Modi's delivery agenda. So that's why I said we have to clearly see these appointments or exits into this thing. One part is the performance, the other is politics. So it's there are very clear.
So if you had to, before I go to Madhavan, if you had to describe the political message in one line, Sandeep, what would it be?
Political message is that it's a question of just a second. It's a political message is very clearly, Barkha, that we mean business, I'm in control, and we have to, we are going forward in a very, very determined manner, in a decisive manner. That's what I see as the political messaging.
Okay, Sandeep, I know
and
you
the
have
political, and with that, if you see the political part, which we'll probably discuss later, there is a very clear, thing of trying to get greater representation, geographic, as well as cutting down the caste strata and, the OBC base, everything else.
Yes, we haven't actually got into the politics of, one eye on UP. Yeah. Thanks, Sandeep. I know you have to go. We'll continue this discussion with our remaining guests. But I think Sandeep did make the important point about the one eye on UP, the emphasis on youth, technocrats, on women, on backward classes. I know that Dilip is making an effort to join us again. Dilip, if you can hear us, if you go ahead with your thoughts. You're on a phone now, which is why this vertical line. But yeah, go ahead. Can you hear us, Dilip? Nope, still no luck. I think we have to. Sanjay, take that. Yeah.
My opinion, in my opinion, the big two buzzwords that are going to affect this government, and Mr. Modi is aware more than anybody else, is governance deficit. Now, this has begun to seep into people's minds. You remember, the pandemic's ramifications are going to be felt much longer than people think. A lot of political analysts seem to say, well, 3 years to the election, people are going to forget it. But, the coverage that you did of the bodies in the Ganga River, 4 lakh people dying within a year. And there are stories and poignant stories of pure devastation. I think this is a nightmare that is not going away in a hurry. And I think, Mr. Modi realizes that today, this is an opportunity for the Congress to say that, listen, we may not be the ultimate headline managers. We are probably one of the worst in public relations and media management. But hey, listen, when it comes to governance, we didn't bring you demonetization. We didn't execute GST as terribly. We didn't make the migrants walk on tracks and then die without food and money. And look at what has happened to you after the pandemic. Let's not even talk about the economy. I think for the Congress, the opportunity would definitely be that, listen, I may not win elections, but I can govern very well if you give me a chance. And I think Mr. Modi is probably going to try and nip that in the bud. And the only way he can do that is by giving new people a chance. Now, I do believe that this government doesn't have good talent, but Jyotiraditya, I would back him. Rajiv has got good corporate experience. Now, governance is a complex thing. If Mr. Modi is able to get a couple of these people to shine, then he may be just able to kind of arrest a decline in the perception of this government that it cannot govern. There is the whole story that the Congress cannot win elections, but it can govern. The BJP can win elections, but cannot govern. I think Mr. Modi will be very desperate to try and reverse that story.
Okay, let me just bring in Madhavan and Sumanth now. So very differing perspectives, and I do want to get into the politics of it with Yashwant in just a moment. But Madhavan, we haven't quite finished on the messaging, so do go ahead.
Yeah, two messages go out. One is that this is not your typically a Hindutva-oriented party anymore, because even people like Narayan Rane and Jyotiraditya Scindia mean that if you bring competence to the table or you bring mass leadership of some kind, you're welcome, either in terms of caste or community. And therefore, this is becoming more like the old Congress, which is very inclusive from above. You know, I used to hear people like Govindacharya say in the 90s, we are not the alternative to the Congress, we are the next Congress in terms of leading everything from above. So that shows, I mean, I want to joke that maybe we should call this the Bharatiya Janata Congress now, because its style of functioning of either bringing in either competence or some kind of a community leadership is becoming critical. The other thing that we should note is that this is a party of ambitions. So don't expect everybody to be just a social servant, which means that down the cadres of BJP, a message has to go out that if you're good enough, you will get ministership, and seniors won't sit there forever like geriarchs. So the cabinet, the dropping of the ministers also shows a message of opportunity or a whiff of blood, if you might say so, to younger lot in the party, saying that if we work hard and if we can go towards performance, seniors will get dropped and we will get chances. So it's a sort of a HR department orientation that Modi is showing, that he wants people to feel involved in this. And the Ministry of Cooperation, which has been created, to me is much more important than it looks on the face of it. Because
Really?
yes, because as somebody who's covered agriculture for Business Standard when it was called the Department of Agriculture and Cooperation, I know that cooperatives have a huge rural muscle. And if it gives a lot of MPs and MLAs some toys to play with in order to play their constituents. And
Okay.
to that extent, I believe that it's optics and some resources, some instruments to play with. People don't understand that governance is not just about, just let me complete, it's not just about holding a powerful ministry or winning elections. It's also about, romancing the constituents in so many ways. And Ministry of Cooperation.
And you actually think that that's an idea that will travel well. Sumanth, you're making the point that some of these exits cannot be seen as punishments, that there could be something else that we don't know about that lies ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, Barkha, as far as the exits go, yes, as I said, Dr. Harshvardhan's exit is certainly as much an admission that maybe we messed up the COVID pandemic management as can possibly be expected from this government. Now you have to realize that the basic policy of the government is never to admit to a fault. In 7 years, I cannot think of any time that a senior minister from this government has come forward and said, yes, we made a mistake and we should have done it this way. So on any issue, even now, demonetization, widely accepted as a disaster. Even now, the government will not talk about it, but nobody will say demonetization was a disaster. So the fact that Harshvardhan and Ashwini Chaubey have gone is the closest that we will get to an admission from this government that yes, we did something wrong and now we're trying to set it right. That's point number one. Second, this talk about we believe in hard work and not Harvard. Today we are sort of taking a little tiny baby step towards Harvard also may matter. Maybe it's not Harvard, maybe it's Stanford or in a few other universities, but we are taking a step back from our stated position that look, education really, is secondary and so on. The contempt that we had for these foreign educated people, that is sort of slowly being taken off. So those are two good things that I see, that this government and Mr. Modi probably feel, yes, whether we admit it or not, we need to make these changes now. 3 years is still left for this government to perform. And I don't agree that all these people who have been brought in are those with proven track records of performance. We don't know the track record of performance of many of them. They're going to be first-time ministers. Some of them, haven't have come in from the organization side and so on. So there is no guarantee that these people are going to perform. And some of those who have been promoted. Tell me, what has Anurag Thakur done so demonstrably wonderfully in the finance ministry to merit a promotion? So there are definitely political reasons beyond what we can see, both for the exits, some for the promotions, and some for the new faces. So I would not tar everything with one brush and say that this is purely on performance.
I think that's an important point, and I want to take that to Yashwant, because you started, Yashwant, by saying that there, in the BJP support base, if you go onto Twitter or social media, there'd be hurrahs for the exits of the 4 big ministers who have exited. But I think Sumanth makes the important point that maybe there are things going on behind the scenes in the party organization that we are not fully aware of, because Prakash Javadekar, for example, I keep coming back to him. He has been a loyal foot soldier of the party during the UPA years. He would do all sorts of sort of paid work, whether it was in unveiling coal scam or the 2G scam and so on. So Mr. Javadekar is not actually a contentious figure. He's one of those who's not a controversial figure.
So he will be taken back to something where the party is lacking the organization. And Barkha, trust me, the same goes probably with Dr. Harshvardhan as well. He will be more of an asset for BJP Delhi campaign rather than in the center as a minister, maybe. There are so many things that are, we are discussing right now because coming out of the wave 2, and we are certainly looking at it from that prism. But look at the way Kiran Rijiju has been promoted, with Himanta Biswa Sarma getting into the chief minister chair. PM Modi wanted a pointsman in the entire northeastern region, and probably Kiran Rijiju is going to fill up that vacuum. And with the promotion of Kishan Reddy in Telangana, you have literally now a chief ministerial face from the BJP for the next Telangana election. Take it in writing from me, because he just fits the bill. And that's why he has been elevated.
What about some of these promotions like Anurag Thakur, Hardeep Puri? What do you make of those?
I don't make much of Hardeep Puri's promotion from the political angle, but certainly from more of a performance angle. I don't think that he has been promoted because of the Punjab election for sure. That I don't agree with that, because he's not really a big name in the Punjab politics. As such, it is not going to make a change. But yes, he is a competent person as in his previous avatar as a civil servant, and now as a minister. And there are so many ex-IAS officers who have been made ministers today. It's interesting to observe in that way. So do
you agree with Sumanth that there's a kind of emphasis, the kind of people that the BJP would have once had contempt for and seen maybe as slightly Latvian-esque? There is some recognition of professionalism, of technocrats, of expertise, in a way that maybe wasn't emphasized in the slightly son-of-the-soil political approach taken, at least in the beginning of the BJP's ascent to power and government.
There is certainly a dynamic movement to that, and there is certainly also a message that, okay, we are evolving. If something good is coming up, we are willing to accept from what the cadre is suggesting us. I would just like to quote, we run this live trackers every day, and we have been asking we run a product called News Tracker, where we ask public reaction on the development of the news of the day. And, as we are talking, Barkha, right now, roughly about 56% are saying that, okay, Mr. Modi is getting the kind of what they can say as a dream team for their second round, and 44% they disagree. And at the same time, the concerning thing should be them. Why exactly there is a mix of optimism and not so mix of optimism? Because 54% at this point of time are still saying that the next 1 year is going to be really hard. And the big monster that we do not really talk about, is the inflation part. 72% at this point of time in our News Tracker poll are saying, Barkha, that they have to actually compromise on what they are eating at this point of time because of the inflation. So there are multiple things that are happening, not just COVID. Inflation is a big thing that is coming up. Economy, lack of job. There are multiple problems that we are facing. And I think this sweeping changes is more of think that Mr. Modi is saying that, okay, we are in business, we mean business, and there are multiple things that he wants to give it out to his own cadre also at this point of time.
Before I take this to Sanjay, that news tracker poll, Yashwant, can we please update some of those findings? 70% in Yashwant Deshmukh's news tracker poll saying inflation is a real cause of concern, down to the food we put on the table, which is why there isn't a necessary resounding thumbs up. The majority are welcoming these changes, but 44% are still not convinced, Yashwant.
That's right. That's what I'm trying to say. That majority of them saying yes, but it is not that resounding. So that resoundingness of the numbers which went up are on the thing that, okay, the government is handling the COVID much better than it was handling 2 months back. That is up. So there is a V-shaped recovery as far as handling of COVID is concerned. But on the other parameter of the governance, it is more of a U-shaped recovery. It's not a V-shaped recovery. So that is going to change time, because jobs, inflation, these are the additional things which the government has to work on the economic side. So in an overall way, I think the message is that the big changes have been done, and the public should look out, the cadre should look out for positive changes from these this new cabinet. That's what the message they are trying to put across.
Okay, Sanjay, how should the opposition be responding to these changes? And then I'll come to you, Madhavan. Is there anything for the opposition to say on this, or should they just zip up? They will, of course, emphasize more on the exits as an admission of guilt.
Well, Barkha, I do believe the opposition, particularly the Congress, has a fantastic opportunity here to put the government on the mat. And I'll tell you why. The BJP's playbook has always been Hindutva politics. Come 2024, I'm going to tell you that Mr. Modi is going to talk about uniform civil code. The Ram temple will be inaugurated. The BJP will stick to its tried and tested formula of basically increasing majoritarian nationalism in the country. Now, the difference, however, and this is not going to be like what Yashwant would call is the big Pulwama bomb that happened in 19. This time, I think the government is under an acid test. Basically, the pandemic has exposed that this government cannot handle a crisis. India has collapsed. The numbers are staggering. They're disturbing. And the nightmare is unlikely to cease at the moment. And therefore, I think Mr. Modi realizes he's never lost an election. But now the job crisis will hurt even more. Now an economy that doesn't recover is going to bleed even further. Now an attempt to try and polarize politics may not work. And therefore, the key word for the survival of this government is going to be, listen, now we want to ask you a question, Mr. Modi and the BJP. Is it true, therefore, what the Congress and the opposition has said since 2014, that your only agenda is communal polarization to win an election? Once you do that, you let us down. And I think that's a narrative that Narendra Modi has to address between now and then. I hope he doesn't do it well, because I'm not a BJP supporter. But for the opposition, for the Congress and the opposition, it's phenomenal.
Okay, let me bring in Prasanna. Karthik is with us, but Madhavan, Sumanth, I know you also wanted to come in. Madhavan, you wanted to come in on inflation and whether it will actually become a political issue, and whether anything. I mean, Yashwant's news tracker poll numbers are actually very, very interesting.
Yeah, two very important points. Inflation has been historically BJP's plank and not the Congress plank, and now the Congress is running away with BJP's.
I mean, the famous Pyaz election in Delhi.
Yeah, exactly. More important. Let's look at the demographic data, picking up from where Yashwant said and Sanjay elaborated. That is that I have coined a new term called the vulnerability line. Poverty line determines, based on nutrition, 400 million people roughly are below the poverty line. Above them are about 500 million people who are, thanks to the pandemic and some of the issues related to jobs and economic mismanagement, have been pushed below what I call the vulnerability line, where your lifestyle becomes worse than before. Instead of achhe din, you sort of begin to feel the pinch the other way. When that happens, especially when it's your own constituency of inflation, it's really bad news. And therefore, they have to address this politically as well as economically in terms of performance. And therefore, if you look at the announcement on pulses last week, they are very aware of this whole atta dal politics, but it's inflation is like Aladdin's genie. If it is out of the bottle, it's very difficult to put it back. Okay, so this is where it's a vulnerability area that we'll be watching out for in the coming days.
That's interesting. Prasanna, Sumant, I'll come to you just a second because we have just about 10 minutes left and I want to spend some time with Yashwant on the politics. So quick comment from Prasanna. We were just discussing whether the exits are actually more significant than the entrants.
Barkha, I mean, we'll have to look at this in entirety. I mean, you can't just look at the exits and the entrants. And in my view, interestingly, so this cabinet also includes Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav, who's a former bureaucrat, a passer from the Wharton Business School, IIT Kharagpur passer.
Yeah, we've just been talking about the fact
and
that he's also education, professionalism.
But he's also credited with institutionalizing the idea of PPP in India. The public-private partnership. And in my view, I think this whole cabinet reshuffle is a PPP, has a PPP factor to it, which is one is politics, performance, and perception. I think Mr. Modi has balanced it quite well, in terms of factoring in all these elements. And obviously there is a political angle to it because at the end of the day, he is a politician and there's a big election coming up in a couple of states and then the national election, 3 years down the line. But let's also not forget that there is an angle of, performance, that is being factored in by bringing in some of the technocrats as well. And my sense is, because before the reshuffle before the names actually got, announced, there were a lot of speculations around names like Varun Gandhi and Rita Bahuguna Joshi and so on and so forth. And all of that has been proved wrong. And there are a lot of surprises, that's been in store. So I think while it is easy to gather in television studios and debate on, why this was done and so what implications it will have, so on and so forth, I really think a wait and watch approach is what would be a better service.
I think that's an important point. I think Yashwant and others also made it earlier about the induction of bureaucrats, the induction of expertise. There is finally some acknowledgement that expertise is needed. Sumanth, you wanted to come in there, and then we need to spend the last 10 minutes on the politics of this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one very quick point. What Yashwant made about there being a divided feeling among the people and there's not a uniform, overwhelming enthusiasm. I think a lot of that is also because people realize that the decision making in this government is effectively with Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister's office, and Mr. Amit Shah. And that's about it. So I think that there is the realization is there that the ministers who have been axed were probably not the ones who were making the big policy decisions in their ministry. And neither are the ministers who are coming in going to be the ones who are going to be making the big decisions. So I think that the lack of enthusiasm for this reshuffle to some extent can be explained by the fact that people know very well that the decisions are made by 2 or 3 people, and the rest of the ministers are basically foot soldiers to carry out what they are told to do.
Let me just, in the last 10 minutes, take a look at what Sumanth has said, that effectively in the minds of people, this is a Modi-Shah government. So rest is all detail, right? Yashwant, but we all know in terms of politics, it really matters to states. In terms of caste groups, it really matters to caste groups. We didn't speak about Chirag Paswan's sort of defecting uncle finding a place in the cabinet. So that's Bihar when we talk about him. There is also clearly one eye on UP. So speak a little bit in these last 10 minutes to the politics of what we're saying, and also to Sumanth's very interesting point that in general sentiment, it's just seen as a Modi-Shah government, everything else is detailed.
I think it's still just Mr. Modi's government. I would not even put it a dual show because Modi-Shah duality was there when Mr. Shah was president and was more seen as running the party and like that. Okay. Nothing else. In that way. And there are very clear political messages as well. In terms of real politics of the state. Anupriya Patel getting in, that's so critical for them in Uttar Pradesh with the Kurmi votes. It's and particularly in the Purvanchal belt, because as we know in the Pashchim UP, in the Western UP belt, because of the Kisan Andolan, there are issues that BJP is going to face with the resurgence of RLD, and Jayant is doing a spectacular work, and with the joining heads with Akhilesh, probably they are going to create trouble for the BJP in Western UP. So they have to really focus hard on the Awadh and the Eastern UP belt. So Anupriya Patel getting in is a very clear message to get along with all the smaller partners who are critical from the caste combination basis. So that is a one. I already mentioned about G. Kishan Reddy because that is also about the greenfield states, as I've been always calling about the states of Telangana, states of West Bengal, Odisha, and also the fact even in Tamil Nadu. I mean, you mark it, Barkha, that within 3 years, the kind of incumbency that might be gaining ground in Tamil Nadu against the state government as well, because they have already won 38 out of 37 out of 39 sitting MPs are from the DMK account right now. So these are the greenfield states where BJP would be looking into compensate, from whatever the probable losses could be from the saturation states, as I call them. So the saturation states as vis-a-vis the greenfield states, there is a very subtle change of the focus shifting from the saturation states to the greenfield states as well, and that is not going unnoticed as far as the political analysts are concerned.
I think that's very interesting. I need to start closing now. Madhavan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the important point to note is that the smug confidence expected through Modi's charisma is gone now. This "Aayega to Modi hi" days are gone. And therefore, the focus is shifting through Modi, for Modi, but on the non-Modi factors, which is performance and
you're saying governance matters more than it used to the BJP.
Exactly.
In a way.
Governance plus what I call workmanship politics, where you carefully choose who will be represented, which community, which caste, and why. It's a chessboard now. Anupriya Patel, and we have a lot to talk on UP, maybe in a separate show, Barkha. But I see in this cabinet expansion, no time to detail now, but a lot of the pawns have been moved to help Yogi Adityanath, partly because of you, Barkha, because you might have undermined some of the stuff, confidence that might have been in the
you mean the mass graves reporting. What I want
exactly.
What I want to spend a minute talking about in that context is the exit of Santosh Gangwar, who wrote letters on the mishandling of the pandemic by the Yogi Adityanath government.
Exactly. So I didn't have the time to elaborate on this, I thought, which is why there is a Gangwar factor, Anupriya factor, and the fact that the Suhaldev party, the Nishads are now split wide open, and Priyanka Gandhi is playing UP, and Modi has one eye on the potential idea of Priyanka becoming a face for UP. All this is at the back of his mind as he churns the cabinet. Okay?
I just want I want Yashwant to add on UP. But I want Yashwant to add on UP, and then you can have your macro point, because I think Yashwant has a very keen sense of UP. Go ahead, Yashwant.
Yes, I mean, I totally agree with Manu that key battlefield within the next 6 months is going to be Uttar Pradesh. And Uttar Pradesh, there is a lot of, it's not just one state, Barkha. It's basically 5 states, into one, combined into one. And there are so many caste calculation going across in different regions about the regional leadership factors and other things that are at play at this point of time. But at the same time, we can not help but notice the fact that the Dalits have been given a substantial representation now as well, and the leadership is given them space. So I believe that the non-Yadav OBC and non-Jatav Dalit, that was the core of the BJP game plan in Uttar Pradesh. They have to still figure a way out how to key in the Brahmins who have been certainly angry with this government so far. And if Priyanka plays up the game, then the Brahmins probably will get a chance to move to the old party.
Yeah, so I think you were seeing those inductees were just from Uttar Pradesh. The last few slides that we played you, Yashwant has just frozen there, but I think he made the point by deconstructing those details. Madhavan, I'll come to you for the macro picture. I just want to take Prasanna, because he joined us late, just an input from him, and then you and Sanjay and Sumanth can have the closing words. Prasanna, go ahead.
Yeah. So Barkha, while there is a lot of emphasis on UP, because they've inducted people from Purvanchal, from Bundelkhand, Awadh, But let's not forget that one of the more, I think there is an even more important election, which is Gujarat state election. Because if you remember, that's Mr. Modi's bastion. And in 2017, it didn't actually look like, there was a point in time, in the run up to the final results, that during the counting process, it almost looked like, the BJP might not, cross the finishing line. While eventually when the counting rounds increased, the picture actually became clear that BJP will win, but it wasn't a decisive victory. So I think that is a good amount of focus that they've laid on that as well, with Mr. Mansukh Mandavia being elevated to a cabinet position, and we also have the MP from Surat, Darshana Zardoshi, getting a position as well. So that is also something that we need to bear in mind. But one last point quickly, Barkha. So this is clearly, from a political and a perception standpoint, because there's a lot of caste equation and also a lot of other states like greenfield states have been taken into cognizance. But so far as the performance is concerned of this government, at the end of the day, it is Mr. Modi who's going to be held accountable by the people of the country, good, bad, ugly. He's the one who will be held accountable for the country.
And that is interesting. And therefore, a cabinet reshuffle is in public perception doesn't go very far. It's more that the government needs a good team. Is what you're actually saying. Quickly, Madhavan, then Sumanth, and then I'll give the last word to Sanjay. Very quickly, 30 seconds each. Madhavan, yes.
Yeah, only BJP can no longer take any state for granted except perhaps Gujarat and Uttarakhand. That it shows, if you look at what happened in Rajasthan and MP, where Scindia came and saved the show. So there's a lot that the BJP has to do on the ground in order to stay in power. And increasingly, that is becoming either towards working out specific combinations for areas based on community or based on performance. And therefore, there's a lot of hard work ahead, and we are entering the slog overs of politics. And the next year is going to be very critical, because after that, we'll be heading into an election mode.
Yeah, Sumanth.
Two quick points, Barkha. One is regarding the geographic distribution. I just want to point out that at the end of today's reshuffle, 4 southern states between them, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana together have 1 cabinet minister in Kishan Reddy and 2 ministers of state. So I just want to put that out. So we still haven't got the complete balance in. But the last point I want to make is, yes, I agree with all the others. The days of Mr. Modi just turning up at the campaign, on the campaign trail, and the election being in the bag, at least at the state level, I think that those days are gone. He still remains by far the most popular leader in the country. But the COVID pandemic has now made people think, because it hit them literally in their houses, and it made them think, wait a minute, maybe governance also matters. So I think that Mr. Modi and the team will have to focus, at least to some extent, on governance if they want to capitalize on his charisma to take them home in 2024.
Fair enough. Sanjay, 2 quick points to you. One, as what do you feel seeing Scindia today on the other side of the trenches? What's the lesson the Congress should take from that? And 2, how do you know the government won't respond with more politics of polarization to actually deflect from some of these problems that Yashwant Deshmukh's tracker were in fact deflecting?
Well, I can tell you that Jyotiraditya Scindia is a huge asset for the BJP. I'm not saying it because I know Jyotir personally. I do know that he's very talented, hardworking, and smart, and therefore, it is a bad loss for the Congress, although the Congress leaders will never publicly admit it. As far as the argument of Mr. Modi is concerned, let's be very categorical here. Today, Barkha, he is the political brand. Minus him, I think the BJP, frankly speaking, will struggle humongously. Let us accept that reality. The verdict in 2024 is going to happen on the persona of Mr. Modi and his perception. And therefore, for the opposition, the message here is very clear that if you want to just attack him ad hominem attacks or stuff, that's not going to work. You can definitely take him to the cleaners on the COVID, on the economy, unemployment and inflation. But you will need a personality to take him on. Because like it or not, we keep saying that, the BJP has made it the contest presidential. But I've always believed, even in a parliamentary democracy, it is quasi-presidential. People want to know who's going to be the prime minister and the leader who's going to lead the country forward. And to that extent, Mr. Modi is aware that he still has a tactical advantage, which is why Mr. Modi's or the government's hubris comes up very often. They believe there is no alternative, and therefore they can still pull it off.
I think it's going to be fascinating to see who gets the key portfolios of health, education, IT and information and broadcasting. Those have been the four big sackings today. And I somehow feel that Jyotiraditya Scindia is going to get a critical ministry. And it's interesting to see the emphasis return on governance while the politics continues to be shaped around brand Modi. So we will leave it there. Madhavan, Sanjay, Prasanna, Sumanth, and earlier to Yashwant. Sorry, Dilip. You need to fix Nizamuddin East where you live. All of our guests who live in Delhi's Nizamuddin East area are never able to connect to us. I don't know whose conspiracy this is. To our audience, we'll keep tracking this big political story. Join us tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.